or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4930, a bill to expand the sharing of information with respect to suspected violations of intellectual property rights in trade, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 361, H.R. 4930, a bill to expand the sharing of information with respect to suspected violations of intellectual property rights in trade.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Moore, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I appreciate Chairman Smith from Missouri for his support of this piece of legislation that my colleague from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, and I have proposed today for consideration. I'll share a few remarks on this, but again, appreciate the committee and the entire staff and the work that they've done to make this possible. I'm very pleased, Mr. Speaker, that my bill, H.R. 4930, which I'm calling the Counterfeit Notification Act, has been slated for floor consideration today. I introduced this bill with my colleague, Mr. Brad Schneider of Illinois, to target the influx of counterfeit goods entering the United States and to equip our Customs and Border Patrol officers to share real-time information with businesses, e-commerce platforms, and logistics companies. To put things into perspective, in fiscal year 2023, Customs and Border seized more than $2.7 billion worth of counterfeit goods at the U.S. border, and more than 46% of seizures originated from China and Hong Kong. This poses serious national security threats and risks to citizens due to products of poor quality, hazardous material, or unknown production conditions, such as, of course, forced labor. My bill addresses a key gap in CBP's ability to spot and halt the flow of counterfeit goods into the U.S. under current law. When CBP suspects a shipment may be counterfeit, they are only allowed to publicize limited information. They are unable to share labels, invoices, or packing slips that identify the products of the country of origin with key stakeholders. This leaves the business community, e-commerce platforms like Etsy and Amazon, and logistics carriers like DHL, UPS, FedEx. It leaves them in the dark when counterfeit activity is happening right under their nose. To solve the issue, the Counterfeit Notification Act gives CBP explicit authority to share relevant information with companies, carriers, and platforms when they receive potentially counterfeit shipment. This will include shipping labels and tracking numbers, invoices and shipping manifests, outer packaging images, or sender and recipient addresses. The bill also broadens the range of parties with whom CBP can share information, such as e-commerce sites from which the products in question may be sold. This means that CBP will be able to recognize and flag patterns of behavior like repeat senders of mass shipments, drop addresses used by organized counterfeiters, or common entry points or air routes for suspected counterfeit goods. For example, if a counterfeit shipment from China repeatedly enters the U.S. via the Port of Los Angeles using the same fake return address, CBP will be able to share these patterns with carriers like UPS, DHL, and FedEx so they can intercept future parcels before they arrive on American soil. This is a common-sense bill that will strengthen U.S. national security, kneecap bad actors, and protect the IP of American companies, and I appreciate the support of my colleagues on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I now reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you, and Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 4930, introduced by my colleague and friend, Representative Blake Moore. I join him in our praise to our staffs who work together, and it's good to see us working on a common-sense solution. H.R. 4930, the Counterfeit Notification Act, gives U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents the ability to share information about counterfeit goods with retailers and manufacturers. The bill clarifies U.S. Customs and Border Protection's authority to share information about packaging, product specifications, and packing materials when their agents encounter a shipment of suspected counterfeit goods entering the United States. Sharing this information with retailers, manufacturers, and logistics companies will help them better identify fraudulent shipments and target organized counterfeiting operations. The bill also allows CBP agents to work directly with the intellectual property owners and with parties involved in the supply chain to better intercept counterfeit goods and track their country of origin. Protecting intellectual property is essential for sustaining innovation, economic growth, and global competitiveness, especially in my district, which is home to some of the largest companies developing the next generation of medical technologies. We know that counterfeit products can be dangerous to consumers and present serious safety and public health hazards. In fiscal year 2024, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection seized more than 32 million counterfeit and pirated items across more than 300 ports of entry, all total valued in excess of $5 billion. In the past 5 years, the number of illicit goods seized by CBP has more than doubled, while the value of those seized goods has grown by more than 400%. The members of the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition note that the cost of trafficking counterfeit goods is not only measured in dollars, but also in the injuries caused by dangerous products, in jobs lost to unfair competition, and by the threats such products pose to our national security. Whether we are talking about baby products, fashion goods, pharmaceuticals, or even electronics, this bill presents a common-sense solution to strengthen our country's ability to detect counterfeit goods and to keep the American people safe. I want to thank my friend and colleague Blake Moore of Utah for working with me on H.R. 4930. I was proud to see this bill pass out of the Ways and Means Committee last year with a unanimous bipartisan vote. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this bill here, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers at this time, and I continue to reserve. Ready for close.
Gentleman reserves.
I'm ready to close.
Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you. I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, this bill gives U.S. Customs agents the tools they need to identify counterfeit goods, investigate supply chains, and better protect Americans from dangerous counterfeit products. Again, I want to thank Congressman Moore on his partnership on this bill. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 4930, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Utah.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remainder of my time. Our intellectual property rights have secured over 2 centuries worth of American leadership in innovation. They form the foundation upon which opportunity for entrepreneurship is built and which makes the U.S., our economy, the envy of the world. My legislation, along with Mr. Schneider from Illinois, this legislation addresses a current weakness in our IP protections by ensuring those at CBP who are on the front lines of defending our national interests are better aligned with the businesses and workers that define our economic might. I encourage all of our colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 4930, as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6956, the Barcode Efficiency Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6956, a bill to require electronically prepared tax returns to include scannable code when submitted on paper and to require the use of optical character recognition technology for paper documents received by the Internal Revenue Service.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on this bill under consideration.
Without objection,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
the gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 6956, the barcode automation for revenue collection to organize Disbursement and Enhance Efficiency Act, also known as the Barcode Efficiency Act, which is a bipartisan piece of legislation introduced by Representative Rudy Yocum and Brad Schneider. Many government agencies have had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. The IRS is no exception. But in the case of the Barcode Efficiency Act, all we are really asking the IRS to do is to adopt technology that has been around for decades by requiring the IRS to deploy scanning technology for certain returns and correspondence. This bill will streamline the tax filing process for millions of Americans and go a long way to improving accuracy over the previous method of manually entering data from paper tax returns. This most recent tax filing season, where Americans saw a historic 11% increase in refunds, with the average refund of over $3,200, has just concluded. Had this legislation been in law already, Americans would have gotten back what they were owed even faster. As a key leader on the Ways and Means Committee oversight efforts, Representative Yocum has been a strong advocate for improving customer service at the IRS, battling to save taxpayers time and money. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 6956, the Barcode Efficiency Act, which I'm proud to have introduced with my friend and colleague, Representative Rudy Yocum of Indiana. This bill would help expedite the digital transition at IRS, requiring the IRS to implement scanning technology to speed up paper return processing. In the tax year 2023, the IRS reported around 7% of tax returns were filed on paper. Now, 7% may sound like a small number until you realize it represents approximately 10 million paper returns to be opened and processed. That's more than the entire population of New York City, our most populous city. In fact, that's more than the population of all but 10 U.S. states. This bill will help expedite the processing of these 10 million returns by directing the IRS to adopt barcode scanning and optical character recognition, or OCR technology. For those wondering why this bill is necessary, you need to only learn about the current intake process for paper returns at the IRS. Millions of Americans still use paper returns, including both returns prepared electronically but printed and filed on paper, and handwritten returns or paper correspondence. Currently, when a paper return arrives at the IRS, an employee manually transcribes that data into IRS systems, line by line by line by line. The process is not only time-consuming, it's costly and often inaccurate. Data entries occur from manual transcription and cost American taxpayers money. Returning processing delays translate directly into refund delays, needlessly causing financial hardship for taxpayers with limited savings or on fixed incomes. Data transcription errors can lead to prolonged disputes, and the issues compound from there. A data entry error can cause math error notices requiring taxpayers to respond to the IRS if they disagree with the adjustments being made. Errors also cause taxpayers to wait even longer for resolution, requiring more documentation from the taxpayer, more calls, more correspondence, and the delays continue to build. These extra steps all add to the backlog at the IRS, costing all taxpayers more money and eroding trust in the overall tax system. The good news is we have a solution. The Barcode Efficiency Act will require the IRS to implement scanning technology and dramatically reduce the number of paper tax returns that require that manual data entry, thereby accelerating processing and improving taxpayer service. IRS's problems with digitization and processing paper returns have long been an area of focus for the National Taxpayer Advocate, which listed IRS challenges in processing and digitization as the first and second most serious problems at the IRS in last year's annual report to Congress. I again extend my appreciation to my friend Representative Yakum for his partnership working to address this problem with common sense solutions. I thank Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal for their support of this bipartisan legislation. I also want to extend my thanks to the Taxpayer Advocate Service for their recommendation that led to the creation of this bill and for the critical ongoing work to reduce taxpayer burden and improve IRS performance. I am proud that this bill has the support of both the National Taxpayer Union and the American Coalition for Taxpayer Rights, the National Trade Association made up of retail tax preparation and tax software companies. I urge my colleagues to support this bill to help the IRS operate more efficiently and better serve the American taxpayer. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield so much time as he may consume to the co-lead of this legislation, Mr. Rudy Yakum from Indiana, who is a critical member of the Ways and Means Committee, fighting for oversight and keeping his eye on the IRS.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 6956, the Barcode Efficiency Act. I'm proud to co-lead this act with my friend from Illinois, Mr. Snyder. This is a simple but powerful bill that will make tax return processing faster, more accurate, and more efficient. E-filing taxes is becoming even more common. In 2009, 2/3 of taxpayers e-filed their returns. By 2015, it was up to 85%. Last year, 94% of taxpayers e-filed their returns. That remaining 6% still accounts for 10 million tax returns. There are good reasons to file a paper return. I actually found myself in such a position last year. After I electronically filed my taxes, as most taxpayers do, the IRS continued to kick back my return, trying to convince me that I owed the IRS less money than I actually did. We reran the numbers time and time again, but we still came up with the same results. We had a few choices at this point. We could either file the return, as the IRS suggested, and risk later on owing a lot of money and penalties and interest and things like that, or we could call them up and get into an argument with somebody at the IRS, or we could just simply print it off and file the return. And that's exactly what we chose to do. The problem is, once we file that return, and my return this last year was 202 pages, there's someone at the IRS that actually manually enters in every single digit on all 202 pages. Just imagine the problems that can create, Mr. Speaker. Someone transposes a number, and all of a sudden, you've got an inaccurate return, and the IRS can later come after you for an audit. Or you may have substantial delays in receiving your refund because of the amount of time it takes to manually key in all that data. It's just simply a waste of time and a waste of resources. There's better ways of handling that, and frankly, I think it's time for the IRS to come into the 21st century. That's why my colleague, Mr. Snyder, and I have introduced the bipartisan Barcode Efficiency Act. This would require that the IRS increase its usage of scanning technology, particularly for paper or handwritten returns. No more manual entry would be needed or required. This will certainly complement efforts already underway by the Trump administration to phase out the use of paper and to adopt scanning technology. The scanning technology has been recommended by the Taxpayer Advocate as well as the GAO, and it's been used by state tax agencies for years. Paper returns will still be necessary at times, but we can do better, Mr. Speaker, because there is proven commercially available technology that can end the hand entry of tax returns. It will increase the speed and the efficiency and the accuracy of processing. It'll get refunds out the door quicker, so the Hoosiers that I serve can get their money back faster. Again, quite simply, it's just time for the IRS to come into the 21st century. I'd like to thank my colleague across the aisle, Mr. Snyder, for his great work in getting this bill introduced. I would also like to thank Chairman Smith and Chairman Schweikert for their partnership, as well as Senators Young and Warnock. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan common sense bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Illinois.
I have no more speakers, Mr. Speaker. I'm prepared to close.
Prepared to close. Gentleman from Missouri. Prepared to close. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time. I'm proud that we're here today to advance this seemingly modest bipartisan bill that will have an outsized impact to improve service at the IRS. I've long championed investing in modernization at IRS to improve taxpayer service and make government more efficient. The archaic manual transcription process that IRS currently uses to process paper returns results in significant delays that can last months or even years and cause severe hardship. It's long past time that the IRS implements scanning technology to improve the speed and accuracy of processing these returns. Implementing a modernization process is a common sense change with bipartisan support that will reduce refund delays, all while lowering administrative costs. No matter how Americans file their taxes, digitally or by paper, they should be able to rely on timely resolution and quality service from our IRS. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Missouri,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the remainder of my time.
without objection.
Many Americans have had to endure frustration and anxiety at the hands of the IRS bureaucracy when it comes to filing or waiting on their tax returns to be processed. Anything we can do to make this process more efficient and user-friendly for the American taxpayer is well worth our time. And if we are reforming our tax code to provide more relief to working families, we should be modernizing our tax agency to get that relief to them as soon as possible. I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6956 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. It says from Missouri seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 7971, the Taxpayer Experience Improvement Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 527, H.R. 7971, a bill to provide for modernization and technological improvements of services provided by the Internal Revenue Service.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Bayer, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on this bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Chairman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 7971, the Taxpayer Experience Improvement Act, bipartisan legislation introduced by Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee Chair Mr. David Schweikert and Representative Don Beyer. In 2023, the Government Accountability Office found that roughly 1/3 of IRS information technology applications and over 20% of agency IT software were anywhere from 25 to 64 years old. That means some of the systems in place at the IRS today were in operation before the Apollo 11 crew landed on the moon. This bill responds to that reality by imposing much-needed transparency on the IRS and requiring the agency to be more accessible for taxpayers, including folks who are seeking information about the status of their tax refunds or data on how the agency is performing when it comes to responding to taxpayers. Our Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee Chairman Schweikert has been a leading voice in Congress on deploying new technology to bring government into the modern era, and I appreciate his leadership on this issue. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
I first want to thank my friend and colleague, Mr. Schweikert, for his leadership on the Taxpayer Experience Improvement Act, and I'm proud to support him on this. The IRS has made great strides since the pandemic to improve customer service for taxpayers, contributing to a successful filing season last year. The agency was able to process more than 165 million income tax returns and delivered refunds to 104 million taxpayers, the overwhelming majority on time and with no issues. This is in large part thanks to the funds provided to the IRS through the Inflation Reduction Act, which reversed decades of underinvestment in the agency. However, even during what was a relatively smooth filing season, millions of taxpayers experienced delays receiving their refunds or difficulties communicating with the IRS due to issues on the agency side. It's hard to overstate how disruptive delayed refunds and unresolved notices can be for taxpayers. Families structure their annual budgets around the timely arrival of the refund checks, and a lengthy delay can throw their budget into chaos, particularly if the taxpayers aren't able to find out when they can expect to receive a check. Similarly, a notice from the IRS to the taxpayer can cause enormous confusion or anxiety, especially when an individual is unable to get in touch with the agency quickly enough to answer their questions and address unresolved issues. While this bill wouldn't reverse the recent ill-advised staffing and funding cuts pushed by this administration that are undermining the progress we've made with the IRA, it will go a long way towards alleviating the harm to taxpayers. The revisions in this bill aim to reduce the long-term demands on the agency by increasing the level of information available to taxpayers online and facilitating plans to digitize tax returns and correspondence. It would also require the IRS to provide personalized electronic updates to taxpayers regarding the status of their returns and refunds, which should reduce the agency's incoming call volume. Additionally, it would push the agency to implement customer callback technology and add a real-time service dashboard to its website to display call volumes, wait times, and promote the availability of its callback services. All these add up to an improved taxpayer's experience and a more efficient IRS. I greatly appreciate Mr. Schweiker's efforts with this bill to improve the IRS, and I hope that we can build on our success here and give the agency the resources it needs to provide the stellar customer service the American people deserve. I strongly support this measure. I urge yes. I thank you, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Missouri.
I now yield as much time as he may consume to the sponsor of this legislation, Representative Schweikert from Arizona, who, as our Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee Chairman, is a tireless advocate for embracing new technology to improve services at the IRS.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Byer, tireless or annoying. It's one or the other. Look, I have an absolute fixation, and I got to thank my Democratic colleague and a number of the team here for tolerating my fixation on the fact that one of the ways you work within the IRS budget to make things more efficient is the adoption of technology. Imagine a world, because it's the one we live in, where some of the number one calls we get to my district office are IRS questions. Where's my refund? Do I owe money? I can't get someone to pick up the phone. How do I get information? This piece of legislation, it's a great start. It will provide wonderful visibility. The concept that on this thing we all walk around, the supercomputer we have in our pocket, I can go on and actually see the dashboard. See, hey, I owe money. I have money coming back. Here's where it is in process. Here's my different years. The ability to actually have a system that calls you back. In many ways, these are technologies the private sector has had for a decade. In many ways, these are actually technologies that we've been talking about in the Ways and Means Committee for almost a decade. But now we finally have a fairly simple piece of legislation here that means you as a taxpayer in the next couple of years will be able to log on, absolutely private login system so we protect your identity, protect your privacy, but you can see, and by the ability to see that dashboard means you don't have to be picking up the phone and calling the IRS. You don't have to be sitting there on hold for hours. You don't have to be, I would argue, if you want taxpayer participation in a voluntary tax system as we are, make it easy to understand where you're at, what you owe, what is owed to you. And with Mr. Byer's help, We really appreciate it. And I owe a thank you to the Ways and Means staff. I want to go further, but this is a terrific start. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers, and I'm ready to close when appropriate.
Ready to close? Gentleman from Missouri?
Prepared to close.
Prepared to close. Gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, the American people deserve a first-rate customer experience when they interact with the IRS, and this legislation will help the agency reach that goal. The IRS has been under tremendous pressure to do more with less in recent years, and based on the success of last year's filing season, it has proven it can rise to the challenge. This bill will focus the agency's efforts on providing timely information to taxpayers, speed the digitization of forms and correspondence, and implement other resource and time-saving measures. These provisions will take some of the load off of the IRS and its limited resources and overworked staff, all while improving the experience for the taxpayers. I greatly appreciate the bipartisan support for this bill and the leadership of tireless and annoying Congressman Schweikert. I hope that the success of this initiative will lead to more bipartisanship on tax administration going forward, and looking forward to working with my colleagues across the aisle to further improve the IRS. Thank you, and I urge my colleagues to vote for the bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, it is disappointing, though sadly not surprising, that we have to legislate to modernize an agency like the IRS so that its operations are more user-friendly to the American taxpayer. But that's the reality that we're facing. The Taxpayer Experience Improvement Act pushes the IRS to be an agency more worthy of the taxpayers it serves and more responsive to their needs. Whether it's tracking a tax refund, receiving a call back from the agency, or making a payment. I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 7971 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Gentlemen from Missouri seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 7959, the IRS Whistleblower Program Improvement Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 526, H.R. 7959, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to make improvements with respect to the treatment of whistleblowers and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on this bill under consideration.
Without objection?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection?
Thank you. I rise in support of H.R. 7959, the IRS Whistleblower Program Improvement Act, bipartisan legislation introduced by Ways and Means Tax Subcommittee Chairman, Mr. Mike Kelly, and the subcommittee's ranking member, Mr. Mike Thompson. The IRS relies in part upon whistleblowers that have the courage to report bad actors who are committing tax fraud, tax evasion, and other similar crimes they witness occurring in the private sector. The IRS Whistleblower Program is one of the many government efforts that is crucial to combat the epidemic of fraud and stop bad actors from stealing hard-earned dollars from American taxpayers. Since 2007, this program has led to the collection of over $7 billion in unpaid taxes. At a time when it appears we need a comprehensive approach to combating fraud across various government programs, Ways and Means Tax Subcommittee Chairman Kelly is building on his long-standing commitment to reform and improve the IRS whistleblower program to better protect whistleblowers and appropriately award them for their contributions to combating fraud. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this bipartisan legislation and want to thank my colleague, Mike Kelly, for working with me on this effort. Our bill's a good one, Mr. Kelly. Let's be honest about where we are right now. We ask Americans to comply with one of the most complex tax systems in the world. We expect them to report accurately, pay what they owe, and follow the rules to the letter. And the vast majority of Americans do exactly that. But we also know that there are individuals and entities who exploit that complexity to cheat the system. They hide income, they manipulate structures, and they take advantage of gaps that ordinary taxpayers would never even know exist. And too often, they get away with it. At the same time, the enforcement side of the equation is under real strain. Between staffing losses and reduced enforcement capacity, the reality is that the system is not catching everything that it should. So whether we say it out loud or not, we are increasingly relying on whistleblowers to help fill that gap. People on the inside, people who see the fraud firsthand, people who are willing to step forward and take a risk to do the right thing. If that's the system we're operating under, then it has to be a system that actually works. And right now, it doesn't. Whistleblowers face uncertainty. They face long delays, and in some cases, they face real personal and professional risk just for coming forward. That's not how you encourage people to expose wrongdoing. That is how you discourage it. This bill makes targeted improvements to fix those problems. First, it protects whistleblowers' privacy. If someone is exposing tax fraud, they should not have to fear retaliation or public exposure just to be heard. Second, it strengthens fairness in the process. It ensures that whistleblowers receive meaningful, independent review of their claims, not just a rubber stamp or prior decisions. And third, it addresses delays head on. When the government takes too long to act, whistleblowers should not be the ones paying the price. Providing interest on delayed awards is not a bonus, it's a basic fairness. This is about making sure the rules we already have are actually enforced. Because when tax cheats get away with it, everyone else pays more or they get less. And when whistleblowers are ignored, discouraged, or exposed, fewer people will come forward the next time. That's how you undermine confidence in the entire system. If we want a tax system that's fair, enforcement has to be credible. And if enforcement depends in part on whistleblowers, then we need to treat them like they matter. This bill does exactly that. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for your good work, and I urge a yes vote and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Missouri.
I now yield so much his time as he may consume to the sponsor of this legislation, Representative Kelly from Pennsylvania, our Ways and Means Tax Subcommittee Chairman, who has fought for some time to make these reforms to improve efforts to combat fraud.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak in support of the IRS Whistleblower Program Improvement Act. I want to thank my colleague and counterpart on tax policy, Mr. Thompson. We worked very closely on this, and we have a genuine concern that we get this right so the American people understand that we are overlooking what's taking place. Now, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your recognition of the important role our whistleblowers play at the IRS and your support for getting the bill before the House today. Our tax system depends on voluntary compliance, and that only works when Americans trust the system is fair and enforced evenly. When bad actors cheat and get away with it, that trust erodes for everyone else who plays by the rules. The IRS Whistleblower Program Improvement Act builds on a proven program that delivers results for our taxpayers. Since 2007, the program has recovered more than $7.37 billion in unpaid taxes, narrowing the tax gap and holding bad actors accountable. This is real money returned to the Treasury that would otherwise have been lost. In many cases, These are complex, high-dollar schemes that would not have been identified without insider information, proving that whistleblowers play an essential role in upholding the integrity of our tax code. When individuals come forward to expose wrongdoing by tax cheats and fraudsters, they help ensure our voluntary tax system remains fair for all Americans. The IRS cannot fully close the tax gap through traditional audits alone. The IRS whistleblower program leverages insider knowledge to identify noncompliance that would otherwise have gone undetected. Whistleblowers help the IRS target enforcement resources towards high-value cases, improving efficiency and accountability across the system. This program directs those resources toward the highest value, highest probability cases, maximizing the impact and improving efficiency. It allows the IRS to focus on those actively evading taxes rather than casting a wide net over the vast majority of Americans who are trying to comply with the law. Strengthening this program is a common sense way to increase the return on an investment, recovering more unpaid taxes without expanding broad-based enforcement. Just as important, the program serves as a powerful deterrent, discouraging sophisticated tax evasion before it happens by increasing the likelihood that it will be exposed. This bill reinforces the program's foundation with targeted practical updates by ensuring the U.S. Tax Court can consider all relevant evidence by providing a more favorable standard of review in whistleblower appeals, establishing a presumption of anonymity for whistleblowers to help protect individuals from retaliation, by encouraging timely administration from the IRS by requiring the payment of interest on delayed awards, strengthens transparency and oversight by improving reporting to Congress and allowing administrative review of award determinations, aligning the tax treatment of attorney's fees for whistleblowers with other whistleblower programs. These reforms keep the program focused, predictable, and effective, addressing long-standing delays and improving program credibility. I want to thank the Ways and Means staff on both sides of the aisle for working so hard on this, because you did a great job, not just for Mr. Thompson and myself, but for all the taxpayers. The American taxpayers deserve this oversight, and I'm glad we're working on it, Mr. Thompson. Great job. This bill passed out of Ways and Means last month with unanimous support, reflecting broad agreement on the need to strengthen this program. Ensuring a fair shake for all taxpayers is what it comes down to. Thank you to the National Whistleblower Center, Empower Oversight, Taxpayers Against Fraud, the National Taxpayers Union, and other organizations who have spoken out in support. A strong whistleblower program is essential to a credible tax system, one that rewards honesty, deters misconduct, and holds bad actors accountable. I urge my colleagues to support the bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers. I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman's prepared to close. Gentleman from Missouri.
Prepared to close.
Prepared to close. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time. Thank you, Chairman Smith, Mr. Kelly, Ranking Member Neal, for the good work that was done, and I concur with Mr. Kelly. Staff on both sides have done, as always, a fantastic job. Mr. Speaker, this bill comes down to fairness and enforcement. When people cheat the tax system and get away with it, honest taxpayers are the ones who pay the price. And if we expect whistleblowers to help close the gap, we need to protect them, treat them fairly, and ensure that the system works. This is a practical, bipartisan step to strengthening enforcement and restoring confidence in the system. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, whistleblowers play a critical role in government oversight, whether it be uncovering bad actors within government or, in the case of the IRS whistleblower program, alerting the IRS to those in the private sector who are defrauding American taxpayers. The Ways and Means Committee, this Congress, and this administration have made combating fraud a key priority. And I welcome this opportunity to strengthen and impose a key tool in that effort, I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 7959, as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking the vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6495, the Taxpayer Notification and Privacy Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 372, H.R. 6495, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to provide for specific taxpayer notice when information is sought from third parties.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 6495, the Taxpayer Notification and Privacy Act, bipartisan legislation introduced by Representatives Greg Stubbe and Jimmy Panetta. When the IRS seeks information about a taxpayer, the agency should not be able to go behind their back without their knowledge. But right now, the IRS can do just that. Currently, the IRS is not required to notify a taxpayer who is under review or investigation about what information the agency is seeking, who it may have contacted, or for that matter, give the taxpayer the opportunity to provide the information themselves. This puts the individual taxpayer in a situation where their privacy, their livelihood, or their reputation could all be unduly harmed. That's unacceptable. And thanks to Representative Stubbe, a tireless advocate for the American taxpayer who has been focused on holding a powerful agency like the IRS accountable, taxpayers will be better protected. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And of course, thank you to Representative Greg Stubbe and his work together with me on the Taxpayer Notification and Privacy Act. It's common sense, bipartisan legislation passed unanimously out of the Ways and Means Committee that would ensure that the IRS respects the privacy and the dignity of every taxpayer when collecting needed information. As you heard from the chairman, under current law, the IRS must notify taxpayers before reaching out to third parties like banks, employers, or even neighbors to gather information. Yet these notices are often vague. They fail to specify what exactly they want, and at times they don't even give taxpayers any opportunity to defend themselves or for the taxpayer to provide the information themselves. The National Taxpayer Advocate warned that the current approach falls short. It leaves honest Americans blindsided, and it can put people's reputations at risk in close-knit communities where a whisper about the IRS investigations can chill businesses and damage livelihoods. The Taxpayer Notification and Privacy Act changes that. It would implement a National Taxpayer Advocate's recommendation to mandate tailored notices in which the IRS clearly states what information it needs and from exactly whom. It then grants the taxpayer a full 45 days to supply that information. This empowers families. This empowers businesses to resolve issues privately. with the IRS, protecting the reputation and relationships with local banks and other vendors. This bill also includes certain exceptions for circumstances where the information is determined to be necessary or when the information is sought specifically to collect tax liability. This strikes the balance we want in legislation creation between allowing taxpayers to resolve issues privately and ensuring that these notices cannot be used to avoid taxes. Ultimately, taxpayers who have followed the law shouldn't have to fear the IRS soliciting sensitive data behind their backs. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Missouri.
I now yield such time as he may consume to the sponsor of this legislation, Representative Stubbe from Florida.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 6495, the Taxpayer Notification and Privacy Act. At its core, this common sense legislation is a simple due process idea. Before the IRS goes to your bank, your employer, your vendor, or another third party for information about you, when you can reasonably provide that information yourself, you should be told what they're looking for and given a fair chance to respond. Under current law, taxpayers can receive a general third-party contact notice, but too often those notices aren't specific enough to let a person meaningfully respond. And when the IRS reaches out to third parties, it can create real-world consequences: reputational harm, confusion, stress for families and small businesses, especially when the taxpayer could have simply produced the records directly. Mr. Speaker, this legislation is about building a healthier relationship between the taxpayers and their government. Our citizens deserve a federal government that respects privacy and due process while still ensuring the IRS can do its job. This bill does not stop the IRS from obtaining information it truly needs. It simply ensures taxpayers receiving meaningful notice and a fair opportunity to provide the information themselves when appropriate. For law-abiding Americans, compliance is already complicated enough. The least we can do is ensure that when the IRS intends to go outside the taxpayer to gather information the taxpayer can provide, the taxpayer gets clarity. What exactly is being sought and a fair chance to respond. This is a bipartisan effort, and I'm honored to work with Congressman Panetta on this legislation because protecting taxpayers and improving procedural fairness should not be partisan. I also want to thank Senator Barrasso of Wyoming for being the leader on this issue in the Senate, and I hope this bill can receive quick consideration in the Senate and sent to the President's desk. I thank Chairman Smith for his leadership in creating a more efficient, more transparent tax administration that works better for all taxpayers, and I urge my colleagues to support the Taxpayer Notification and Privacy Act. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, we have no additional speakers.
No additional speakers. Gentleman from Missouri.
We're prepared to close.
Prepared to close. Gentleman from California.
Thank you. Just briefly, again, obviously thanking Representative Stubbe and Chairman Smith for their leadership on this. And I urge the House to pass this common sense legislation. The Taxpayer Notification and Privacy Act will ensure that taxpayers are treated with transparency, with dignity, and with fairness that we all deserve. By giving Americans a clear chance to provide information to the IRS first, we can protect their privacy, their reputations, and their relationships. This will reduce unnecessary third-party probes, saving resources and protecting taxpayers. This strengthens trust between our constituents and the government while ensuring that taxes are properly collected. And that is why I urge a yes vote, and I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Missouri.
Among the supporters of this bill is the National Taxpayer Advocate, the independent organization tasked with helping taxpayers solve problems with the IRS. Their recommendations align with the changes this legislation would enact to strengthen taxpayers' rights. It is not only about protecting a right to privacy, but also the principle of fairness that all Americans should be afforded under the law. I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6495 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5366, the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 525, H.R. 5366, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to codify and extend the rules for personal casualty losses arising from major disasters and the rules for the exclusion from gross income of compensation for losses or damages resulting from certain wildfires.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on this bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 5366, the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act, bipartisan legislation introduced by Representatives Greg Steube, Mike Thompson, and Jimmy Panetta, and named after our late colleague, Mr. Doug LaMalfa, who dedicated his life to public service and was a very strong advocate for helping so many of his constituents whose lives had been turned upside down by wildfires. The chief sponsor of this legislation, Representative Steube, hails from the state of Florida, which is no stranger to the worst of natural disasters, including hurricanes that have devastated communities there and everywhere. But the bipartisan work that has been done in advancing this legislation speaks to the fact that no community in America is safe from a potential natural disaster. Every member of this body has had to or will have to, at some point, respond to some level of devastation brought to the doorsteps of the folks that they represent because of a natural disaster. This bill appropriately extends an existing provision within the law that allows taxpayers to deduct personal casualty losses stemming from a natural disaster, while also excluding wildfire disaster relief payments from taxable income. These are the common sense measures that ensure Americans recovering from a disaster have fewer tax burdens and more resources to navigate their recovery. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Smith, for your work on this, and Mr. Steube, thank you for your partnership. I represent communities in Northern California that have been on the front lines of catastrophic wildfires for years. I've sat with families who've watched their homes burn to the ground. I've spoken with small business owners who lost not just their storefronts, but their entire livelihoods. And I've met with farmers and growers who saw generations of work wiped out in a matter of hours. And after all of that, after the fire trucks leave, after the smoke clears, after the cameras are gone, those families are left to navigate through the aftermath. They're dealing with insurance claims. They're trying to find temporary housing. They're figuring out how to rebuild their lives. And then they run into the tax code. In Northern California, my constituents had to fight tooth and nail just to get basic common sense tax relief. Think about that. Doug and I had to fight to pass this relief, and we worked to mobilize victims to speak out and demand that that tax relief be forthcoming. People who lost everything should not have to come to Washington, D.C. to fight for relief. We should not be asking disaster victims to lobby Congress in the middle of recovery. We should not be telling families that the help they receive to build their homes might come with a tax bill attached. And we should not be forcing communities into uncertainty every single time disaster strikes. This legislation ensures that when Americans receive disaster relief, they're not penalized by paying tax on that relief. And this is not just about the past, it's about what is happening right now. In Los Angeles, across Southern California, in Hawaii, and in Colorado, families reeling from devastating fires are being forced to navigate the same uncertainty those in my district faced. They should not have to come back to Congress and ask for relief that we already know is necessary, because disaster relief should not depend on your ability to navigate the Congress. It should be automatic, it should be fair, and it should be there when you need it. This bill is a step toward that goal. It reflects what we've learned from Northern California. It reflects the realities facing communities in Los Angeles, Hawaii, and Colorado. This legislation is a great first step, and we should now work to make this relief permanent going forward. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
I now yield as much time as he may consume to the sponsor of this legislation, Representative Stubbe from Florida, who has been a very strong advocate for those recovering from natural disasters, including the citizens of his home state in Florida.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of H.R. 5366, the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act. When hurricanes, wildfires, floods, tornadoes, and other disasters strike, American families are left to rebuild their homes, their businesses, their communities, and their lives. When these moments arise, the last thing they need is the federal government making their recovery harder by taxing relief payments or denying fair treatment for disaster losses. Nor should the government be creating uncertainty in the tax code. This legislation provides certainty to disaster victims by extending and codifying common sense tax relief for Americans impacted by federally declared disasters. It allows individuals to deduct qualified disaster-related casualty losses without having to itemize, removes burdensome limitations that can prevent families from receiving relief, and ensures certain wildfire relief payments are not treated as taxable income. For families in Florida, this issue is not theoretical. We know all too well what it means to rebuild after hurricanes, flooding, storm surge, and the aftermath of these disasters. Recovery does not happen overnight, and families should not be forced to navigate a confusing tax code, especially without certainty in what that code may be, as they are still trying to repair their homes, replace their belongings, and get back on their feet. No one understood this better than our former colleague, Doug LaMalfa of California. For 13 years, Doug served in Congress as a tireless advocate for disaster victims and spent years fighting to ensure families impacted by wildfires specifically receive fair treatment under the tax code. Last Congress, I was honored to fight along Doug as I led a bipartisan coalition alongside our colleagues on the floor with us right now, Jimmy Panetta, Mike Thompson, and Jill Takuda, as well as former Representative Bill Johnson of Ohio. Our historic efforts culminated with the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act of 2023 being signed into law on December 12, 2024, delivering billions in disaster tax relief to millions of Americans across 48 states. The bill we are voting on today builds upon that legislation. Today is an opportunity to secure disaster relief certainty for the wildfire victims that Doug LaMalfa spent years fighting for. It's also an opportunity to secure relief for disaster survivors who have experienced a tragic event since July 4th, 2025, and who may experience one in 2026. With hurricane season on the horizon, it is critical that Floridians have certainty in the tax code. I thank Chairman Smith for his leadership in advancing this legislation through the Ways and Means Committee with unanimous bipartisan support. I'd also like to thank Senator Rick Scott for leading this bill in the Senate and being a tireless leader on this issue. I would also like to thank my aforementioned colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Jimmy Panetta, Mike Thompson, and Jill Takuda, for their commitment to securing disaster relief for their constituents, my constituents, and Americans regardless of political affiliation or geography. And finally, I want to thank Doug LaMalfa for being an ally, a friend, and a fighter. Doug is deeply missed in this institution, and naming this bill in his honor is a simple but meaningful tribute. Mr. Speaker, when Americans are recovering from disaster, they deserve clarity, certainty, and relief, not more red tape from Washington. I urge my colleagues to support the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Florida yields. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, a valued member of the Ways and Means Committee and someone who has seen firsthand what devastating wildfires can do to your district, Congressman Panetta.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Thompson, of course, Mr. Chairman, and yes, definitely Greg Stubbe for allowing me to speak on this topic, in which I support the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act. I am a proud co-sponsor, co-lead of this bill with Reps. Greg Stubbe and Mike Thompson, a bill that would build on the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act, which we passed last Congress thanks to the leadership of Representative Stubbe, a bill that would ensure that those affected by disasters nationwide have continued access to tax relief. This is one of those bills, as you're going to hear from Representative Stubbe, from Mr. Thompson and Ms. Takuda, this is not a partisan topic when it comes to providing proper tax relief for our constituents who have been affected by natural disasters. Disasters that don't just affect red states or blue states, they affect all American states. And that's why this bill is so important. It would extend the provisions of the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act through 2026 to, one, ensure that those affected by fires and natural disasters can claim the personal casualty loss deduction to help in the recovery, and two, would exempt fire settlements from taxation to avoid devastating tax bills on wildfire victims. Now, unfortunately, after most natural disasters, there are limitations in the tax code that make it very difficult for survivors to claim the casualty loss deduction for uninsured losses. Specifically, losses must be attributable to the federally declared disaster, and exceed 10% of adjusted gross income. That prevents many from qualifying for tax relief. In fact, the tax code ends up penalizing fire victims by treating settlements from fires as income for tax purposes. That can trigger a bill, as we've heard, as large as 37% of the settlement. Now, the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act that was signed into law last Congress addresses those issues by ensuring that those who received settlements for certain wildfires, including payments from the Fire Victim Trust, do not have to pay taxes on those payments. It also designates certain federally declared disasters as qualified disasters for the purposes of determining personal casualty losses. That ensures that families who incurred uninsured losses due to a natural disaster, be it damage to their home or property, can declare that loss and lower their tax bill. If we do not pass this bill, the thousands of people who survived the 2025 Los Angeles fires, who received settlements, risk a devastating tax bill and face limitations recouping uninsured losses. That's why Congress is acting in a bipartisan way to prevent the tax code from penalizing constituents who are trying to rebuild after such disasters. So I urge my colleagues to support this common sense bill to extend the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act to help families all across America, from Hawaii to California to Florida, and those in between who were struck by natural disasters, and get the necessary tax relief to recover, rebuild, and move forward with their lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from California for 2 minutes, Mr. Fong.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Congressman Stubbe for his leadership. I rise today in support of the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act, which includes my bill, the Doug LaMalfa Protect Innocent Victims of Taxation After Fire Extension Act, which was his bill that he originally fought for. I want to thank the Ways and Means Chairman, Chairman Smith, the members of the committee, and the committee staff that made this bill a priority. In California, we are all too familiar with the devastation caused by wildfires. After these disasters strike in our community, survivors shouldn't have to worry about burdensome federal taxes as they work to recover and rebuild. Today, we have an opportunity to address that while honoring my friend, the late Doug LaMalfa, who is a tireless champion of rural California and an advocate for those rebuilding after wildfires. This section of the bill allows for wildfire victims who receive disaster aid incurred from a wildfire to have that payment exempted from gross income filings. This would exclude wildfire recovery payments from federal income taxation through 2032. Without this extension, victims of catastrophic wildfires would again have their relief payments subject to federal income tax obligations. For families and individuals who have lost everything, this can make all the difference. I ask my colleagues to support this critical legislation, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Hawaii, someone who has seen devastating wildfire that impacted her district and her constituents, and she's done great work to bring relief to them, Congresswoman Takuda.
The gentlewoman from Hawaii is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mahalo, Mr. Chair, and my colleagues who have co-led and provided leadership on this important bill, Representative Stubbe, Representative Thompson, and Representative Panetta. And of course, I rise today, like so many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, to honor our friend, Doug LaMalfa, who understood the disaster after the disaster happens when families cannot recover and return to their hometowns because the funding and resources they receive just doesn't stretch far enough, or worse, gets taxed and taken away from people who need absolutely every single dollar to be able to rebuild. On Saturday, I stood above Lahaina, and for a moment, a briefest of moments in the darkness, the town almost looked normal. But immediately, you realize that something is missing. No warm glow from homes and businesses, no kids riding bikes, no neighbors gathering in garages. The people of Lahaina were not counting on that day. They did not seek or ask to lose their homes, their businesses, their livelihoods, their history, their loved ones. But they should be able to count on this, that every dollar and every resource meant to help them rebuild, recover, and return home stays with them, in their pockets, not in government coffers. As I stand here today wearing Doug's pin above my heart, I know he's up there smiling right now. Doug believed recovery should not come with the tax bill, and the Doug LaMalfa Federal Disaster Tax Relief Certainty Act makes sure of that. As we all know too well, the burden of those touched by fire, flood, hurricane, tornado, disaster, it's already too much to bear. It is already far too heavy. We should not be making it heavier. For my constituents and disaster and wildfire survivors everywhere, let's stand with them in this moment and every moment to come. Let's show them some aloha, and let's make sure that we all vote yes on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
We are prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
No further speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, this bill is about basic fairness. When Americans lose their homes to wildfires or other disasters, the last thing they should face is a tax bill on the help they receive to rebuild that home. My constituents in Northern California had to fight for that relief. Families in Los Angeles should not have to do the same, nor should they in Colorado, Hawaii, or anyplace else. Let's pass this bill today and then do the work to make these protections permanent, so no disaster victim has to come back to Congress for relief ever again. This legislation is rightfully named after our former colleague and my friend, our friend, Doug LaMalfa, who worked hard to protect his fire victims, and we should pass this bill. I urge everyone to vote yes, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
In 2024, Congress acted to provide critical tax relief for Americans hit hard by natural disasters. The goal was clear: provide relief to those who need it most. With this legislation before us today, we have the opportunity to continue ensuring victims of natural disasters, including wildfires, continue to receive the relief that they deserve and the resources they desperately need to recover and rebuild. I want to thank Representative Stubbe for this bill and for his hard work to appropriately pay tribute to our late colleague, Mr. LaMalfa, on an issue that was such a passion for him. I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5366 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the House rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2347, the Survivor Justice Tax Prevention Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 519, H.R. 2347, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to exclude from gross income any damages other than punitive damages received on account of any sexual acts or sexual contract.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on this bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 2347, the Survivor Justice Tax Prevention Act, bipartisan legislation introduced by Representatives Lloyd Smucker and Gwen Moore. Survivors of sexual assault face a long road to recovery without having to battle with the IRS over keeping the compensatory damages or settlements that they receive. Unfortunately, right now, the burden of proof that a sexual assault survivor would have to provide to the IRS, including medical records, to prove that they deserve to have their settlement funds excluded from gross income for tax purposes, ignores the fact that such victims often do not have the same observable physical injuries that other victims of assault might have. This clarification in law is desperately needed, and I thank Representatives Smucker and Moore for the true compassion that they have shown in fighting to right this wrong for victims of sexual assault. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I might.
The gentlewoman
consume.
is recognized.
Thank you. I just want to start out by thanking our Chairman Smith and our Ranking Member Neal for bringing this important bill to the floor for consideration during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. As a survivor of sexual assault, I just want to thank Mr. Smucker for teaming up with me to develop this important legislation that supports victims of sexual abuse who so often have no voice. At its core, this bill is about fairness, Mr. Speaker. It's about dignity and justice for survivors. Mr. Speaker, I just really don't have to go into detail about the problem that our nation, and indeed even this institution, has with sexual abuse and assault. Currently, settlement payments for sexual assault survivors are made on account of personal physical injuries or physical sickness, and they're excluded from gross federal income and therefore not subject to taxation. Well, we all know that sexual abuse doesn't just cause physical harm. There's indelible mental harm that is caused by sexual assault. And yet, these survivors face challenges proving that sexual assault resulted in physical injuries because they don't have evidence of so-called observable bodily harm and have been denied the tax exemption. Our bill, the Survivor Justice Tax Prevention Act, which I'm again so proud to leave with Representative Lloyd Smucker, addresses this situation by allowing a tax exemption for all harms caused by sexual abuse. Because the harm is real and lasting, even when it's not visible. We are working to ensure that survivors do not have to be re-traumatized by proving so-called observable body harm, having to produce deeply personal records, or to be abused by a settlement on which they have to pay taxes. Mr. Speaker, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Wisconsin reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
I now yield such time as he may consume to the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Representative Smucker from Pennsylvania, who has done great bipartisan work in advancing a much-needed solution to support survivors of sexual assault.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time and also for bringing this bill up to the Ways and Means Committee. I'd like to thank Ms. Moore for working with me, co-sponsoring and introducing this bill, and thank members of the Ways and Means Committee who supported this on a unanimous basis, because they realized the injustice that was occurring today in the way the IRS is applying the current tax code. And I think the chairman and Ms. Moore both have described it really well. But the core problem here is, first of all, we believe, or current law already says that any victim of physical abuse, any victim of sexual abuse that receives a settlement does not owe tax on that settlement, which makes complete sense. If you think of the trauma that these individuals have gone through, if you think of the work they're doing to rebuild their lives, the last thing we should be doing is taking a portion of that settlement that they so desperately need to rebuild their lives for tax purposes. So the law already says that settlement is not taxed. However, the way the IRS has applied this, they require a proof of observable physical harm, like bruises, cuts, or some other apparent evidence of damages to qualify for that settlement as tax-free. And as you can imagine, sexual violence doesn't always leave visible scars. And so as a result, survivors who have already endured unimaginable trauma can face a second injustice under the current law, or the way that the IRS is applying the law, and that is by being taxed on their compensation simply because their suffering doesn't meet some arbitrary standard. So our bill fixes that problem, fixes that injustice, helps these victims, and does it in a targeted way. It clarifies that payments related to sexual assault automatically are treated as tax exempt. This ensures that survivors are treated fairly and they're treated consistently under the law. H.R. 2347 is about dignity, it's about clarity, and it's about making sure that survivors receive justice, not a tax bill from the IRS. So I thank again the chairman, the leader, for bringing this bill up for a vote on the floor. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. And once again, I want to thank Representative Gwen Moore for her partnership on this important issue. And with that, I thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you so much. I want to start by acknowledging the very passionate words of my co-sponsor, Mr. Smucker. So pleased that he took this on with such generosity and passion. You know, Mr. Speaker, we hear all the time about the high-profile civil cases involving sexual abuse. And I'm thinking about the accounts of trusted gymnasts, physicians abusing star athletes and the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and many of his associates. We even hear about sexual assault that occurs within our own body, and we have to address that problem. But let's just take a moment to acknowledge that all sexual abuse does not make the headlines. Every time a survivor comes forward, it takes extraordinary courage in the face of personal risk, scrutiny, and cost. The Survivor Justice Tax Prevention Act takes a belts and suspenders approach to ensure that settlement payments, whether arising from a court judgment, private arbitration, or mediation, that made on the account of sexual abuse are not subject to taxation. I urge my colleagues in the House to support this effort to make the tax code better, serve all survivors who receive settlements after prevailing against their abusers without saddling them with a tax bill or having to fight with the IRS. We need to get this fix passed into law. So pleased to be standing here in this chamber and asking for a vote by suspension of the rules. We need to pass this into law to ensure fair treatment of the tax law, dignity in the face of undue administration burdens, and justice for survivors who prevail against their abusers. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, it is disturbing to think that the IRS is allowed to tax survivors of sexual assault on the compensatory damages or the settlements that they have received. Such victims should not have to relitigate their case before the agency, adding insult to the injuries that they have already suffered. I encourage my colleagues to support this great piece of legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Missouri yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2347 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to consider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5334, the SEED Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 520, H.R. 5334, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to allow early childhood educators to take the educator expense deduction and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 5334, the Supporting Early Childhood Educators Deductions, or SEED Act, which is bipartisan legislation introduced by Representatives Brian Fitzpatrick and Jimmy Panetta. Early childhood educators are the foundation of a lifetime of education for the next generation of leaders in the country. They put in the long hours and often dip into their own wallets to provide educational materials for their classrooms. Unfortunately, unlike their K through 12 colleagues, they are not afforded the same tax deduction to help cover those expenses. This is a long-standing oversight that needs correcting. This legislation provides early childhood educators with the same deduction so that they are on equal footing with their school colleagues. I commend Representatives Fitzpatrick and Panetta, who are standing up for America's teachers and have been championing the cause for years. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Missouri yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and of course, thank you to my colleague and classmate, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick. I do rise in support of my Supporting Early Childhood Educators Deductions Act. We'll just call it the SEED Act. This is legislation that would extend eligibility for the educator expense deduction to early childhood educators, pre-K educators, who are currently excluded from that benefit. It's bipartisan legislation that I worked on closely with Brian Fitzpatrick and was reported unanimously out of the Ways and Means Committee. And I will proudly say, the only Democratic bill that has been allowed out of the Ways and Means Committee this Congress. So I thank Mr. Chairman for that. A bill that finally recognizes the vital role early childhood educators play in shaping the foundation of a child's development. These educators work with children during their most formative years, laying the groundwork for cognitive, social, and emotional growth. Yet despite this enormous responsibility, these teachers remain excluded from basic tax benefits that acknowledge teachers' financial burdens. The SEED Act would correct this by finally extending the existing above-the-line educator expense deduction to early childhood educators working with children 5 years old or younger. The $300 deduction, which will rise to $350 next year, may seem modest, but for educators who routinely dip into their own pockets to provide classroom supplies, it is a meaningful, impactful support. It's also federal recognition of teachers and their professionalism, their dedication, and commitment to the development of our children. Across the country, we are facing a severe shortage of early childhood educators, a crisis that's driven by low wages and limited support. Yet despite those challenges, early childhood educators continue to extend themselves to ensure children that they have safe, enriching environments to which they can grow. They do this even when their paychecks fall short, even when they are forced to choose between personal expenses and classroom needs. By including early childhood educators in the educator expense deduction, the SEED Act acknowledges both the economic hardship and the extraordinary dedication these educators bring to their work every single day. As a result, I do urge my colleagues to vote yes. I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
I now yield so much time as he may consume to the co-lead of this legislation, Representative Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, who recognizes and is championing the needs of all of our teachers with this important legislation.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the chairman for his support for this legislation and bringing it to the floor. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of H.R. 5334, the Supporting Early Childhood Educators Deductions Act, also known as the SEED Act. Mr. Speaker, in Pennsylvania, more than 68,000 early childhood educators support our youngest learners every single day. The first 5 years of a child's life lay down the foundation for how they learn, how they grow, and how they succeed. And these educators are central to that process. They do far more than teach. They create safe, engaging environments where children can thrive. And despite earning very modest wages, these educators often reach into their own pocket to stock their classrooms and ensure their students have the resources they need to succeed. That level of dedication speaks to their commitment, Mr. Speaker, not just to their students, but to the communities they serve and our future workforce. Under current law, early childhood educators cannot deduct these out-of-pocket expenses. That's a gap the SEED Act will fix. The SEED Act offers a simple bipartisan solution by extending the existing educator expense deduction to early childhood educators. It is a common-sense measure that supports educators and invests in our youngest learners during their most critical years. I want to thank my friend, the gentleman from California, Jimmy Panetta, for his partnership, his care and concern for our educators and for our young people across America. And I urge all my colleagues to support this legislation to better equip and uplift our early childhood educators and those they serve across this nation. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers, and I am prepared to close.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time. To myself.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge the House to pass this common sense legislation. By expanding eligibility for the educator expense deduction to early childhood educators, the bill will finally recognize the incredible dedication and work of these pre-K educators. This is one step towards supporting those who extend themselves day in and day out to help grow and educate all of our children. Again, I want to thank Representative Fitzpatrick, thank the chairman for pushing this bill forward, and I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill with a vote of yes. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to supporting teachers who go the extra mile to provide for their students, including paying out of pocket for supplies and other education materials, we need to ensure we are acknowledging and rewarding the contributions of all of our educators. That includes the early childhood teachers who are charged with instilling in our youth a love of learning and curiosity from the youngest age. I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5334 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6903, the Ensuring Children Receive Support Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 541, H.R. 6903, a bill to require the Secretary of State to revoke any United States passport issued to an individual on receipt of a certification by the Secretary of Health and Human Services that the individual has a child support arrearage exceeding $2,500.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 6903, the Ensuring Children Receive Support Act, bipartisan legislation introduced by Representatives Beth Van Dyne and Jimmy Panetta. This legislation has a simple premise. Parents must meet their obligations to care for their kids, period. Pretty simple. To ensure that is happening, state-level child support agencies rely in part on the passport denial program, which is run out of the State Department and, as its name suggests, is used to deny the ability of delinquent parents to obtain a passport to leave the country when they owe back child support. The State Department has authority under current law to deny, limit, or revoke a passport of an individual. But as we have discovered, quite often the bureaucracy does not act with the level of urgency that's needed. This bill makes it clear that the State Department must revoke an individual's passport, both at the time of initial application for a passport and at the time of renewal. Research indicates that child support is a significant portion of income for low-income families, making up 41% of total income when received, and can help reduce poverty and reliance on welfare. Among all families served, 24% have income below the federal poverty level. Representatives Van Dyne and Panetta are doing tremendous work here to ensure that states have the enforcement tools that they need and children receive the support that they need and are owed without delay. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the Ensuring Children Receive Support Act, which I am proud to co-lead with Representative Van Dyne, and I want to thank her for her leadership and thank the chairman for pushing this bill forward with overwhelming support out of the Ways and Means Committee onto the House floor for this vote. This bill would expand the existing bipartisan legislation and the universal common sense values of taking care of our children. It addresses the somber issue of when it comes to the services and protections that we can provide for children. Now, we all know that parenthood is a privilege, but it is also a serious responsibility. Unfortunately, nationwide, there is more than $115 billion owed in child support arrears. As of fiscal year 2024, there were more than 8.7 million parents who hadn't made a payment in over 5 years. In 1996, Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, gave the State Department the authority to withhold passports and passport renewals to someone with unpaid child support. That's called the Passport Denial Program that collects about $30 million a year in outstanding child support debts. But this is out of about $30 billion that we collect each year in total child support payments. That means that the vast majority of child support goes uncollected. Single parents struggle, and unfortunately, that means that at times, children can go hungry. I believe we should be doing everything we can to close this gap and ensure child support is making it to the children that need it the most. The Ensuring Children Receive Support Act is part of that effort. It's legislation that builds on the existing law that I talked about by rescinding passports when someone is more than $2,500 in arrears for child support. When you don't pay, you must stay. Under this bill, people would get a notice that their case is being referred to the State Department. However, and if necessary, there would be an emergency passports if they are urgently needed, if there is an urgent need to travel when in arrears. Moreover, they would also be eligible to have their passports reinstated once they pay their child support. With this bill, we are ensuring that the federal government plays its part to meet the urgency that so many single parents feel and are finding practical solutions to ensure that child support gets paid. That's why I urge my colleagues to vote yes. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
I now yield such time as she may consume. The sponsor of this legislation, Representative Van Dyne from Texas, who is standing up for children across this country to ensure that they get the support that they need.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the chairman for yielding, and I want to thank my colleague, Congressman Panetta from California, for also helping to introduce this bill. I rise in support of my bill, H.R. 6903, the Ensuring Children Receive Support Act. Nearly 2 weeks ago, families experienced one of the largest tax refund seasons on record, with an estimated $91 billion already issued as part of an expected $370 billion refund season. On average, families can look forward to nearly $4,000 back in their pockets compared to last year. And families with 2 children earning $73,000 will have no federal income tax liability. Supporting working families is more important than ever, especially now that the working families tax cuts have been signed into law. By claiming the standard deduction and the child tax credit, families keep more of their hard-earned money to be able to provide for their families by putting food on the table, covering rent, or keeping up with everyday expenses, giving them immediate relief when it matters most. But ensuring children are taken care of should not be negotiable, particularly in joint custody households where both parents share responsibility. When child support obligations go unmet, that responsibility breaks down, leaving children without the consistent support that they deserve. In 2024 alone, there were over 8 million unpaid child support cases at the direct expense of our children. And that's why stronger enforcement tools are necessary to hold delinquent parents accountable. And Mr. Speaker, just weeks after the Ways and Means marked up my legislation, we've seen reports that the administration is moving to proactively revoke passports for individuals who owe significant child support. That reinforces exactly what this bill is about, making sure the tools we already have used are both effective and consistently used. The passport denial program administered by the State Department currently allows for the denial or revocation of a passport when an individual owes more than $2,500 in past due child support and seeks consular services. My bill strengthens this program by requiring the State Department to revoke an individual's passport and notify them of the intent to take such action. If an individual is abroad when their passport is revoked, the State Department may make an emergency exception to allow that individual to return to the United States. Since implementation, this program has successfully collected over $600 million in past due child support, including $300 million in 2024 alone. This legislation builds on that success by strengthening enforcement and ensuring accountability for those who deliberately evade their obligations as parents. When parents meet their responsibilities, children have greater stability, families are stronger, and taxpayers are not left picking up the tab. This is a common sense bipartisan step forward and a clear win for children and families. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers, and I am prepared to close.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly, I urge the House to pass this common sense bipartisan legislation. The majority of child support, as we've heard, goes uncollected, and today we have a chance to do something about it. The Ensuring Children Receive Support Act would expand existing bipartisan policy to ensure the law is enforced and children receive the support that they need. Representative Van Dyne understands that, and I thank her for her leadership on this bill, because a vote for this legislation is a vote to support children, and ultimately it supports families. I urge a yes vote, and I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this legislation strengthens the federal child support enforcement program, which is meant to ensure parents pay the support that they owe to their children. This program is one of the most effective federal programs we have. In 2024, states reported nearly $30 million in collections through the passport denial program, and over 5,000 payments were made to custodial families. The bill closes a loophole in current law that can let parents with large unpaid child support debts receive a passport renewal without consequence. This bill makes sure that the State Department uses its authority to revoke passports, both at the time of the application and renewal. We should use every opportunity to make sure children get the support that they need to thrive. I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation. I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Missouri yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6903 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2431, the New Opportunities for Business Ownership and Self-Sufficiency Act, as amended. 6431.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 435, H.R. 6431, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to modify the rules governing the state administration of self-employment assistance programs.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Carey, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak in support of my bill, which is H.R. 6431, the New Opportunities for Business Ownership and Self-Sufficiency Act, also known as the No Boss Act. This bill is a product of bipartisan work across the aisle, and I'd like to thank my dear friend and colleague from Cincinnati, Representative Greg Landsman, for co-leading this legislation with me. The No Boss Act makes small tweaks to the Self-Employment Assistance, or SEA, program to support unemployed workers who decide to create their own next jobs. The SEA program is voluntary for all states. It allows qualified unemployment insurance claimants to collect an allowance to support their efforts to establish a business in lieu of regular unemployment compensation. Small businesses are the backbone of this economy. For many Americans, owning their own business is the embodiment of the American dream. The No Boss Act supports these pursuits by increasing the percentage of individuals who can participate in the SEA program from 5% to 10%. It eliminates the requirement that a participant must be likely to exhaust their unemployment compensation benefits in order to qualify. Entrepreneurship should not be a last resort for those who are unable to find any other form of employment. Rather, self-employment should be encouraged and indeed practiced. These two changes expand the eligibility and the opportunity to participate in the SEA program for more unemployment insurance claimants. Finally, the No Boss Act strengthens the SEA program by requiring states to certify participation in the self-employment assistance activities weekly and adding new participation activities. Currently, self-employment activities include entrepreneurial training, business consulting, and technical assistance. This bill adds submitting a business plan or market feasibility study for approval by the state to that list. In January, the No Boss Act passed out of the Ways and Means Committee unanimously by voting 41-0. It is important to get this bill signed into law because the SEA program is underutilized. The bill is a great example of how government can support, enable, and foster more entrepreneurship in a meaningful way. Entrepreneurship empowers Americans from all backgrounds at all stages of their professional careers. New business create jobs for members of their communities and strengthen our economy. The No Boss Act is pro-small business and pro-self-starter. I want to thank Leader Scalise, Chairman Jason Smith, Ranking Member Neal for their support in advancing this legislation. I encourage all the members to vote yes on this bipartisan, common-sense legislation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the No Boss Act, legislation for my good friend and colleague Mike Carey, and I also want to acknowledge his co-lead on the bill, Representative Greg Landsman, a demonstration of what neighbors in neighboring congressional members can do together in a bipartisan fashion. The No Boss Act would give workers the choice to use their unemployment insurance weeks as necessary to build their businesses rather than being locked into job searches that don't fit their skills, their needs, or potential. Now, most businesses are small businesses. Nationwide, more than 80%, meaning nearly 30 million small businesses, are a solo venture, meaning they have no employees. The second most common type of business still has fewer than 20 total employees. According to a census in 2022, those solo venture businesses contributed more than $1.7 trillion, or almost 7% to the U.S. economy. The one thing that all businesses have in common is that they are all started with a good idea and a founder with the time and commitment to develop that business. Under the Self-Employment Assistance Program, Americans using unemployment insurance can use their unemployment insurance weeks to start a business. The cost is negligible to the government since it's offered in lieu of normal benefits. Unfortunately, there are only 5 states that offer such a program, and participants are unnecessarily restricted. That's why the No Boss Act would expand this program by doubling the number of people who can use it and let workers opt in earlier, instead of requiring them to wait until they have nearly exhausted their benefits. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, this is not a blank check. Participants must follow an approved training or business plan. There must be a feasibility study, and they must certify weekly so that states can verify their progress. The No Boss Act would simply make common sense updates to a commonsensical program. It is a bipartisan effort, and I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes. I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio previously yielded. Without objection, the gentleman may reclaim his time. Does he wish to do so?
I yield myself the remainder of my time.
The gentleman, without objection, is recognized.
What better way to put more Americans back to work than to foster and encourage entrepreneurship spirit? I encourage my colleagues to support the legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Back. The gentleman from California is now recognized.
Thank you. I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to pass this common sense legislation. As stated before, the No Boss Act would remove red tape and make simple bipartisan updates to an existing program that works. By giving Americans the option to develop their skills and to go to work for themselves, we can improve our unemployment system and opportunities for all American workers. I urge a yes vote, and I yield back, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The gentleman from California yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6431 as amended? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 227, the Clergy Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 370, H.R. 227, a bill to allow a period in which members of the clergy may revoke their exemption from Social Security coverage and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Carey, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Clergy Act. First, I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Fong, for his partnership on this issue. This is how the legislative process should work. Democrats and Republicans coming together to solve real problems for our constituents. For nearly 90 years, Social Security has done exactly what it promised, protecting workers, retirees, people with disabilities, and keeping families out of poverty. Because it works, our responsibility is pretty simple. Make it easier, not harder, for Americans to access and benefit from the Social Security program. Under current law, members of the clergy can opt out of paying Social Security if they choose not to receive benefits. The Clergy Act provides a 2-year window for clergy members to opt back in, to contribute, and to secure the earned benefits they may have previously foregone. Clergy serve as pillars of their community, offering guidance and support in moments that matter the most. This bill ensures that they'll have the opportunity to participate fully in a system that has strengthened generations of American families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from California, Mr. Fong.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of my bill, H.R. 227, the Clergy Act. This bipartisan legislation with my fellow California Congressman Mike Thompson would create a one-time re-enrollment window for pastors and other clergy members who have previously opted out of Social Security, many in their youth, to voluntarily opt back in. For decades, members of the clergy have made the permanent decision of opting out of Social Security. While this choice was made with good intentions, many faith leaders experience significant financial hardship as they approach retirement. Our local pastors and ministers are the backbone of our communities, providing critical spiritual guidance in the Central Valley, throughout California, and across the nation. This legislation empowers them to take greater control over their own financial futures. As lawmakers, we have a fundamental responsibility to strengthen Social Security in its current form while providing a pillar of protection for our seniors, including our faith leaders. The Clergy Act is a common-sense solution to a nonpartisan problem, which is why I'm proud it passed the Ways and Means Committee unanimously on a 40-0 vote, and I commend Congressman Mike Thompson for his leadership and partnership here. I'd like to thank Chairman Smith, Congressman Mike Thompson again, the House Ways and Means Committee members and staff, and all those who've supported this critical legislation. I urge support for this bill and hope to ensure those who have given so much are not left behind in retirement. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, if we're serious about strengthening Social Security, we can't stop at incremental fixes. We must also protect the program from efforts that would weaken this great program. We've heard calls for the so-called reforms are tough choices. Let's be clear about what that means. Cutting benefits, raising retirement age, or moving towards privatization, steps that undermine the guaranteed security Americans rely on. Democrats reject that approach. We believe Social Security is a promise, not a bargaining chip. Today, we have an opportunity to do something constructive. The Clergy Act is a practical, bipartisan step that expands access to Social Security and strengthens retirement security for those who serve our communities every day. We can choose to build on what works, or we can risk it. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Let's build on what works. And I want to thank Congressman Fong, who's been a great partner in this effort. This is important legislation. It will help the people that we represent and all the people that our colleagues represent across this country. I urge my colleagues to vote for this, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 227 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider.
Mr. Speaker,
the gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 8364 to amend Title V United States Code to authorize the increase of the retirement age in the United States Capitol Police.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 8364, a bill to amend Title V United States Code to authorize the increase in the retirement age in the United States Capitol Police.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Morelli, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include additional material on the bill.
Without objection.
I rise today in support of Rep. Brian Stiles' legislation, H.R. 8364, which extends the retirement waiver age for officers within the United States Capitol Police. I would like to thank Ranking Member Morelli for his collaboration on this very important piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, threats against lawmakers are at all-time highs. This weekend's events once again remind us of that reality. Although we've seen a welcome and much-needed increase in recruitment numbers, we continue to have staffing challenges within the United States Capitol Police. Together, these challenges have created difficult circumstances for those who work tirelessly to keep visitors, staff, and lawmakers safe. Under current law, officers are forced to retire at age 57 unless they receive a waiver from the Capitol Police Board. With a waiver, officers can continue to work until the age of 60. H.R. 8364 will extend that waiver timeline to 65. Right now, nearly 60 sworn officers are working on a waiver, which is the equivalent of more than 2 recruitment classes. Without this legislative change, they will all be forced to retire in the next few years. Under our legislation, the Capitol Police Board will have the authority to grant waivers to sworn officers until they reach the age of 65. Notably, this is not the first time Congress has done something like this. In 2004 and 2010, Congress temporarily raised the mandatory federal law enforcement age requirement from 60 to 65 to address staffing shortfalls at the FBI. Additionally, it is also important to note that our legislation gives the Capitol Police Board the discretion to decide who is still fit for the job. The men and women of the U.S. Capitol Police do a tremendous job protecting this institution. We shouldn't be forcing officers to retire when we have staffing shortages that can be easily remedied by this one change. Again, I want to thank the ranking member and his staff for working closely with us on this important matter, and I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Let me begin by offering my appreciation and thanks to the gentlelady from Oklahoma, my friend Ms. Bice, for her leadership in this, and certainly to extend my appreciation as well to the chair of our Committee on House Administration, Brian Stile, for his authorship and his partnership in advancing this bill. And I rise in strong support of H.R. 8364, a bill that, as Ms. Bice has indicated, would increase the age at which Capitol Police officers may serve from 60 to 65 when granted a retirement age waiver by the Capitol Police Board. The men and women of the United States Capitol Police have one of the most critical and demanding jobs in the legislative branch. This was once again underscored over the weekend when Capitol Police officers acted to protect members of this House, including the Speaker and other members of leadership, from the latest attempt at political violence, this time at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. We are all grateful that everyone who attended the dinner was able to leave safely. Capitol Police officers secure the Capitol campus, investigate threats, provide protective details, screen visitors, respond to emergencies, investigate crimes, monitor demonstrations, secure major events, and more. They do this all in an era of dramatically increased threats and strain on the department, and I want to commend Chief Sullivan and former Chief Manger for their diligent work rebuilding the force from the low point it reached after January 6th, and I'm pleased that the department has since grown to more than 2,300 sworn officers. This is meaningful progress, but there is still much more work to do. The large cohort of officers who joined the department after September 11th attacks are now reaching retirement age. kind of hard to imagine, but that's the case. And the department cannot afford to lose those experienced, fully capable officers solely because they reach an arbitrary age threshold. This bill does not change the statutory retirement age of 57, but it does give the Capitol Police Board discretion to allow an officer to continue serving until the age of 65 when doing so is in the public interest. Nothing, and I want to make sure this is clear to people, nothing in this bill lessens the board's responsibility to ensure officers granted exemptions remain fit for duty, fully fit, and capable of meeting the physical and operational demands of the job. This is a prudent, targeted step to preserve experience, maintain staffing, and help ensure the department has the workforce it needs. And for those reasons, I support the bill and urge my colleagues to do the same. I again want to thank my colleague and friend, Ms. Bice, for her leadership, as well as Chairman Stile. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers and am prepared to close.
The gentleman is recognized.
I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 8364, and
The gentleman from New York.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate Ms. Bice and want to urge all of my colleagues. This is an important, prudent, thoughtful measure, and it will add to the safety and protection of the people in the Capitol complex, whether it's members, staff, or visitors, and that's something I know on both sides of the aisle we deeply appreciate and would support. So I urge all my colleagues to support it. With that, I yield back to Ms. Bice.
The gentleman from New York yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 8364? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.